Hey y'all. All right, next section, looking at the human breathing system as well as all of our gas exchange surfaces for respiration to occur in our body. Now, with surfaces where gas exchange occurs, in any organism, it's very different because y'all know we are different than a plant, and we absorb our nutrients and minerals in much different ways than a plant with roots would. So we have to absorb oxygen ultimately by breathing in air and then having it enter into our lungs. And there are specific parts of our lungs that are tailor-made to absorb as much oxygen as possible. And ultimately, this is occurring in the alveoli, in the tiniest of tiny air-filled sacs inside of our lungs. And all of those alveoli have been adapted to perform the absolute best gas exchange possible for our bodies. And these are some of the ways that they have adapted to just to keep us alive and living in the best way possible. So they have large surface area to allow faster diffusion of gases across the surface. They have thin walls to ensure diffusion distances remain short, good ventilation with air so that the diffusion gradients can be maintained, as well as good blood supply to maintain a high concentration gradient so diffusion can occur faster. So inside of your lungs, in the tiniest little air-filled sacs, this would be a depiction of an alveoli. So you can see that as air is coming in, CO2 is being removed from these blood capillaries. Oxygen is passing in and then moving on. And if y'all remember anything from our heart unit, remember blood is leaving the heart is deoxygenated as it comes in from the rest of the body, goes to the lungs, drops off carbon dioxide, picks up the oxygen, comes back to the heart, and then gets pumped out to the rest of the body. So you can have oxygenated red blood cells to go everywhere that it is needed. Okay, and that oxygen is needed for respiration in our cells everywhere in your body. Okay, now when we look at the structure of our breathing system, this little guy has a great depiction. We have our nasal cavity. Air can enter through our nose as well as through our mouth. It enters down into our trachea, then onto the bronchi. Bronchi is plural because you have a right bronchus and a left bronchus. And then from there, we branch out into something called bronchioles. The bronchioles then branch into what's called the alveoli. Okay, now this is all taking place inside of the lung. You both have a left and a right one. And we have some other areas or ways that these lungs are protected. So all of you have ribs that protect your thoracic cavity. That is where your lungs are housed. And these ribs are surrounded by something called intercostal muscles, which we will talk about when we talk about breathing movements. And then inside and around your lungs, you have the pleural cavity, which is filled with fluid. And then underneath your lungs, you have your diaphragm, which again, we'll talk a little bit more about when we talk about breathing movements. So this will be a diagram that's provided for you. Make sure that you write down all the little parts and understand where everything is located. You will also be provided with this table in your notes so you can know what each function of the breathing pathway is responsible for. Okay. And moving on to just understanding your intercostal muscles, which again, we are going to talk about with breathing movement. So I'm going to skip this part just for a moment and talk about the function of cilia and mucus. With cilia and mucus, and I always think about Princess Tiana, so the Princess and the Frog movie of like, it's not slime, it's mucus. Let's talk about it. So in our airways, cilia lines the airways, and you have something called goblet cells that produce mucus. So the passage down the lungs are lined with ciliated epithelial cells, and the cilia comes from it talks about Latin for eyelash. So it's unsurprising these cells have tiny hairs on the end of them that beat and push mucus up the passages toward the nose and throat, where it can be removed. And all of us are probably fighting that right now with so many just different weather changes, and it's cold and flu season and all that good stuff. Now, mucus is made by mucus producing cells called goblet cells because they're shaped kind of like a cup or a goblet. The mucus traps particles like pathogens, bacteria, or viruses and dust and prevents them from getting into our lungs and damaging those cells that are inside of our lungs. So they're very, very, very important. Also important to note, just a life tip, if you juul or you smoke, as you are inhaling all of those things, they are damaging your cilia and your goblet cells. So your ciliated cells and goblet cells are being damaged as you put that into your body. So that's why you have issues with allergies, and maybe you need to cough up a lung every morning, or just really anything else that you're smoking. Not good for you. And this is why, because you need these to help sweep all the pathogens and dust and things that are icky that can get inside of our airways, okay? And here's a great depiction of that so you can see it, okay? Now, looking at the last part, inhalation and exhalation, what we'll pick up on with breathing movements here in the next video. So go ahead, head on over to your CFU. Make sure you get your diagrams and all your notes. It's going to be so important. And that's a wrap. Good job, guys.